It is 03:14 hours, Persian Gulf. The USS Gerald R Ford is 47 nautical miles south of Bandar Abbas, moving at 13 knots. Alongside it, 120 feet to starboard, is USNS John Lewis, a 746-foot replenishment ship operated by a crew of 120 civilian mariners. Right now, 4 fuel hoses run between those two ships. JP-5 jet fuel is moving across at 900 gallons per minute. The carrier's tanks are running low. The fighters on the flight deck cannot fly without this fuel, so the entire strike group holds course. Same heading, same speed. For the next 2 hours, the most powerful warship ever built cannot turn, cannot accelerate, and cannot separate from an unarmed ship carrying 160,000 barrels of explosive aviation fuel. 16 Ghadir-class midget submarines are somewhere in this water. Iran announced that on May 11th. 16, each one capable of firing 2 torpedoes, each torpedo capable of breaking a ship's keel from 600 meters. On the Iranian coastline, shore-based C-802 anti-ship missile batteries are watching the same formation, and hundreds of IRGC fast attack boats are still in the water. Every single one of them survived Operation Epic Fury. Armchair analysts call this the carrier's most vulnerable moment, the golden window. 2 ships locked together, slow and predictable. 1 anti-ship missile, 1 torpedo, 1 drone swarm from the right angle. They say Iran could end American naval operations in the Gulf with a single strike, hit the logistics ship, and the carrier runs dry inside 72 hours. They are wrong about almost everything that happens next, but they are not entirely wrong about the window. By the end of this video, you will understand 3 things. First, why USNS John Lewis is the most important and least protected ship in the carrier strike group. Second, what Iran still has that can actually threaten it. Third, what happens in the 90 seconds after Iran fires, and why those 90 seconds do not end the way Tehran is calculating. Start with what the ship actually is, because most people who watch naval coverage think about carriers, destroyers, submarines. The supply ship is invisible until the moment it stops working. And when it stops working, the carrier stops fighting. USNS John Lewis is a John Lewis-class fleet oiler. Designation TAO-205. Built by General Dynamics NASCO in San Diego. Delivered to Military Sealift Command in 2022. 746 feet long. Displacement around 49,000 tons when fully loaded. It carries 162,000 barrels of F-76 marine diesel and JP-5 aviation fuel. It also carries dry cargo, food, spare parts, aircraft components, ordnance, whatever the strike group needs to sustain operations beyond 72 hours at sea. Unladen, it moves at around 20 knots. During unrep, that is underway replenishment, the Navy's term for refueling at sea, it slows to match the carrier. Both ships hold 13 knots for the full duration of the evolution, 2 hours, sometimes longer. The strike group does not get to shorten that window because something feels dangerous. The physics of pressurized fuel transfer set the timeline, not the tactical situation. Here is what the John Lewis does not have. No Aegis radar, no missile launchers, no torpedoes, no close-in weapon system. The John Lewis class was delivered to Military Sealift Command without organic self-defense systems, not as a temporary gap, as a design decision. The Heritage Foundation's own analysis from January 2026 flagged this in writing. These ships carry no self-defense capability, no armor plating, no hardened compartments, high-value soft targets requiring protective escort or rear area confinement. The crew are merchant marine civilian mariners under federal contract, highly trained, essential, not combat personnel. If USNS John Lewis sinks, the Ford strike group loses roughly 60 to 70% of its aviation fuel budget for the next 72 hours. Not gradually, immediately. Every FA-18 and F-35C scheduled to fly that day stays on deck. The carrier does not become a stationary target. It becomes a $13 billion parking lot. That is what Iran is looking at when its intelligence officers track a UNREP evolution through satellite imagery and coastal radar. Now, stop and look at what Iran actually still has, because the phrase Iran's navy is destroyed is doing a lot of work it should not be doing. It is technically accurate about one organization. It is dangerously misleading about the other. The regular Islamic Republic of Iran Navy took catastrophic losses in Operation Epic Fury. CENTCOM confirmed over 120 warships destroyed in 39 days. The Fateh-class submarine, Iris Fateh, was sunk on March 3rd. The Jamaran-class frigate went down in the Gulf of Oman within hours of the opening strikes. The large surface combatant fleet is gone. But the IRGC Navy is not the same organization. It never had frigates or destroyers. That was never its platform. Its platform is speed, numbers, and saturation. Hundreds of Ghadir-class and Paycap-class fast attack craft, armed with C-802 anti-ship missiles, built for swarming tactics rehearsed in every maritime security belt exercise since 2019. Those boats survived Epic Fury. They were dispersed along the coast before the strikes began. Most were never in port when the Tomahawks landed. The Ghadir-class midget submarines are still operating. 16 confirmed by Tehran on May 11th. 29 meters long, 2 torpedo tubes. Battery running, silent in 50 meters of shallow Gulf water, indistinguishable from the pipeline clutter and thermal noise that defeats American towed array sonar in this geography. The Persian Gulf is on average only 50 meters deep. The bottom is covered in oil well infrastructure, old shipwrecks, and commercial pipeline runs that scatter sonar returns in every direction. The American sonar systems were built for the deep, cold, acoustically clean waters of the North Atlantic. This is not that water, and Iran built its submarine force specifically for this water. Iran also retains shore-based C-802 anti-ship missile batteries along the Hormuz coastline. Effective range of 120 kilometers, radar-guided, sea-skimming flight profile that compresses the intercept window at close engagement ranges. It is the same missile family Hezbollah used against the Israeli corvette INS Hanit in 2006. That was a warship with trained damage control crews, armor, and a functioning radar suite. The C-802 nearly sank it anyway. And the drone inventory has not been exhausted. The IRGC is still operating Shahed series one-way attack drones fitted with maritime guidance packages, small radar cross-section, slow enough that Aegis fire control has to allocate interceptors that cost $4 million each to stop them, cheap enough to fire in waves of 20 or 30 to exhaust the intercept inventory before the expensive threats arrive. This is what Chinese military analysts have been calling the golden window since at least 2015 in open-source defense literature. Predictable course, predictable speed, formation geometry, constrained by the physical requirements of pressurized fuel, transfer across 120 feet of open water. Here is the specific problem. USNS John Lewis has no inner layer of defense. Whatever the escort screen does not intercept reaches the supply ship with no friction remaining, and the fuel hoses are live during the entire evolution. During active fuel transfer, the hoses are pressurized. If a missile or torpedo detonates near the John Lewis during that window, the hoses do not automatically disconnect. There is a manual emergency breakaway procedure. It takes time. If JP5 ignites in the pressurized hose system before the breakaway completes, the fire can travel toward the forward. The carrier's fuel receiving stations are physically open during unrep. That is not a theoretical concern. That is the physics of pressurized flammable liquid and 120 feet of separation. Every officer who has run an UNREP evolution in the Gulf understands exactly what that geometry means. Here is what the actual sequence looks like if Iran fires. The first indication is an electronic warfare alert. The AN/SLQ-32 systems on the escort destroyers detect the radar emission from a C-802 seeker head locking onto the formation, or from a shore-based launch platform going active. Detection to threat assignment under 2 seconds. The Aegis combat system on the nearest berk allocates the track. SM-2 or SM-6 launches from a vertical launch cell. In the compressed geography of the Persian Gulf, the intercept window is shorter than an open ocean. Skimming missiles use the flat water surface to complicate radar track below the radar horizon threshold. 4 layers. Against a single C-802, the math strongly favors the escort screen. Now change the scenario. Iran does not fire 1 missile. Iran fires 10 C-802s from shore batteries simultaneously. coordinates a wave of 25 Shahed drones from a different bearing at the same moment, and positions a Ghadir-class submarine for a torpedo shot from beneath the formation, all within the same 90-second window. That is the three-threat stack. That is the doctrine Iran has been constructing for 2 decades. Each threat type attacks a different sensor system. Surface missiles stress the radar and fire control allocation. Drones exhaust the interceptor inventory through sheer volume. Submarines bypass everything above the waterline entirely. The Aegis system has to triage. It cannot give every track an interceptor. Under saturation, the math changes. Some things get through. Here is something almost nobody in the American media covers about this scenario. Under the law of armed conflict, USNS John Lewis is a legitimate military target. It is not a civilian vessel. It is not a hospital ship. It is a military logistics vessel directly enabling combat operations by a carrier strike group enforcing a presidential naval blockade. Attacking it does not violate international law. Iran's legal advisors know this. American legal advisors know this. That matters because it changes Tehran's calculation entirely. Firing on the Ford is an act that invites the most severe possible American response with zero legal ambiguity. Firing on the John Lewis is a military operation with a defensible legal argument, a documented military rationale, and a precise operational effect. If the supply ship is damaged or destroyed during an UNREP evolution, the Ford's flight operations degrade immediately. The blockade develops coverage gaps. Iranian oil shipments the Navy has been intercepting start moving again. And Tehran can't argue before the UN Security Council that it struck a military logistics vessel directly supporting a combat blockade force, not a warship, not a civilian ship. A calculated escalation, not a reckless one, but it will not work the way Tehran is planning it. When USNS John Lewis takes a hit from an Iranian anti-ship missile or torpedo, the response does not wait for legal review or diplomatic consultation. Classified escalation response packages for attacks on U.S. auxiliary fleet vessels are preloaded and pre-approved at the National Command Authority level. The targeting data for Bandar Abbas Naval Facility, JASC missile battery positions, IRGC fast boat pens along the Hormuz coast, and the shore-based C-802 launch sites is already sitting in the Tomahawk guidance computers aboard the escort destroyers. Vertical launch cells open on multiple destroyers simultaneously. Tomahawk Block Volps, 450-kilogram warhead, 1,600-kilometer range. GPS plus terrain-following navigation that keeps the missile below radar coverage the entire flight. Every battery position that fired, every IRGC facility linked to the attack. Destroyed within 60 minutes of impact on the John Lewis. Not damaged, destroyed. The air wing does not wait for the Tomahawks. FA-18 Super Hornets cycle off the Ford's flight deck immediately on strike packages against whatever targets the E-2D Hawkeye has been tracking in the hours before the attack. The Virginia-class attack submarine, running silent beneath the formation, has been logging the acoustic signature of every Ghadir in the area since the strike group entered the Gulf. The moment Iran fires, that acoustic tracking data converts from intelligence to targeting. The Ghadir that launched does not return to port. Iran fires once. Iran does not fire twice from the same position. But here is what does not resolve cleanly, and this is the part the response packages cannot answer. USNS John Lewis has no self-defense systems. None. This is documented. It was flagged in writing by the Heritage Foundation in January 2026. It was flagged in USNI proceedings in 2019. It was flagged by the Naval War College in academic literature stretching back a decade. There is no currently funded program to add CIWS or point defense missiles to the John Lewis-class hulls. The Navy knows. The budget did not follow the knowledge. Every interceptor the escort destroyers fire against a threat aimed at the supply ship is one fewer interceptor available for the next attack sequence. Every destroyer pulled from the carrier's defensive screen to escort the John Lewis during its transit to reload is one fewer destroyer in the formation when Iran decides to test the gap. USNI proceedings described this precisely in 2019, when the supply ship departs station to refuel itself. Surface combatants peel off from the carrier screen to protect it. The ring of steel gets thinner every time the logistics cycle runs, and in a sustained blockade operation, that cycle runs constantly. Iran does not need to destroy the John Lewis to extract strategic value from the threat. It needs to make protecting it at the required operational tempo cost more than it is worth. If constant threat pressure forces the Navy to reduce UNREP frequency, the Ford's flight operations drop. If the Ford's flight operations drop, the blockade develops holes. If the blockade develops holes, Iranian oil moves again. The economic clock on Tehran's hard currency reserves slows. The regime buys days, maybe weeks. At $30 million per day in lost oil revenue, weeks matter enormously. This is not theoretical. IRGC naval doctrine documents from 2020 and 2022, analyzed by open-source defense researchers, describe logistics interdiction as the primary asymmetric lever against a carrier strike group operating in a confined waterway. Not attacking the carrier, not engaging the destroyers, targeting the thing the carrier cannot operate without. The fuel ship, the vessel with no weapons that nobody talks about until the carrier stops flying. The question this scenario is actually asking is not whether Iran can hit the John Lewis. Under the right combination of saturation timing and formation geometry, the answer to that is yes. The question is whether Iran can make protecting it at the required frequency more expensive than the blockade is worth. And that question does not have a clean answer sitting in any Pentagon briefing room right now. 16 Ghadir submarines in the Strait, hundreds of fast attack boats with C-802 missiles, shore-based batteries that survived every airstrike in epic fury, and at the center of the most powerful carrier strike group on Earth, a 746-foot fuel ship with no missiles, no radar, and no close-in weapon system. The Navy will respond to any strike on it with a force that eliminates the source of the threat permanently. Overwhelming, certain, fast. But you cannot answer an arithmetic problem with a tomahawk. And the arithmetic problem is this: how many UNREP cycles can the Ford run before one correctly timed saturation attack finds the gap in the escort geometry? So here's the question. Is USNS John Lewis the hidden center of gravity of this entire blockade? The quiet, unarmed pressure point Iran has been calculating against for 2 decades? Or is the layered escort screen deep enough and fast enough that striking it is a guaranteed fatal miscalculation with nothing to show for it? Write center of gravity or fatal miscalculation in the comments. The people who land on opposite sides of that argument are about to have a serious fight under this video. We are reading every reply.